Is this thing supposed to be on? Can you guys hear me out there? Okay, I'll fix that. Microphone on? Hello? Okay. Ready? Okay. Awesome. All right. Can you guys hear me? Hey, it works. Okay, sweet. So if you're not here for Plone versus Drupal, you're in the wrong room. So I guess, yeah, we had a good crowd tonight. Awesome. Or today. So if I have to drink a lot of water during the presentation, my throat I've lost my voice, so that's just bad for presenting typically. Oh yeah, so don't forget, as a guest of the Plone versus Drupal talk, we have goodies for you guys. We've got some M&Ms. You're running out. So raise your hand if you don't have any and you would like one, because we will run out of those. That would be kind of funny. Okay, awesome. That's better. Now I can see my slides. I guess we're ready to roll. We'll go ahead and get this thing kicked off then. So I've had a really interesting journey recently. I've spent the last 3 months every Friday afternoon drinking beer and looking at Drupal with this fine man. So this is, if you don't recognize me, this is the person I'm talking about here. This is Doug Van. He and I have basically sat down and decided we wanted to do a civil comparison of Plone versus Drupal. We really wanted to understand where we were similar and where we were different. And the reason I was so excited is because Doug actually lives like 15 minutes from my house. And he's been doing Drupal since 2007. He's actually one of the kind of premier Drupal trainers. He goes all over the world training folks about Drupal. He presents at all the Drupal cons. He's basically the Calvin equivalent in Drupal world of doing the same kind of things I go and do all the time. So it was almost too perfect that we found a person who lived so close who could talk about Drupal so well. So yeah, after much beer drinking and much talking and going back and forth, we would finally settle in and actually get a little bit of work done and talk about the various areas of Drupal itself. Oh, and Doug, his first computer was a Commodore 64 in 1983, and he learned and taught himself BASIC. So he's not a computer science guru. He's a self-taught programmer, kind of same as me. I am not a computer science person, but taught myself programming and computers so that I could go out and make cool websites. And so Doug falls right in line with almost the exact same thing as me. So what we did is we sat down and we had a huge list of what we thought were kind of main areas we probably should try and hit. So I'm going to try and go over all these with you guys today. We'll see how much we get through in the 40 minutes we have allotted. I assume I can go a little over, so we start a little late. But that's basically the methodology. We would sit down and then we'd kind of start talking. I'd figure out if that fit in one of these sections, and I'd start writing in this big Google Doc that we did. And actually, all the material that I talk about today, I mean, the slides will be posted up online. The video should go up online. But we've actually put together a mini Plone versus Drupal website inside the 60up.com site. So all these sections are listed on that site there. All the screenshots that are in the presentation are going to be listed up there as well. So if you actually want to refer back to kind of the source information for where all this came from, it's actually all up on our website because it's been quite an interesting journey. And also, the last comparison that we did of Plone versus Drupal was back from 2010, and we were comparing Drupal 6.19 to Plone 4.0. So if that tells you about any of the age. So we decided we'd kind of blow the dust off this process and go do it again and see how things have changed, if they've gotten better, worse, or how we compare. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with obviously if we're going to compare them, we better talk about how we're going to install and deploy our instances. This is mostly going to be about the download and install experience as a new developer coming to that product. So we basically, they both have a similar download experience. I think each of them you're 3 clicks away. Obviously on plone.org, it takes about 3 clicks to get here, and you're downloading a tarball and installing that into your system. Yeah, you basically, one of the really nice things about Plone, if you're new to Plone and never been in the community, there aren't a lot of dependencies you have to get installed into your system, especially for like on a Mac. We've taken care of this pretty well with the unified installer experience of just run install.sh. It gets all the dependencies and compiles Python. It does all the little bits for you, and then you start the instance and point your browser at it. There isn't too much more to kind of getting going. Again, kind of the benefits here of Plone is very few dependencies are needed to get started. There's no requirement really to run Apache or have a database server or any of that kind of thing because we're really relying on the Zope application server and the embedded database, the ZODB, to get started. So if, as a newcomer, then not a lot of moving pieces to get going. Now, the downside is it is a very large download. So start your download, go get a coffee because it's going to take a little while. And then running that build, the install.sh takes a little bit of time. So again, you may have to go get your croissant and come back because it takes a while to get going. Now, the Drupal experience is very similar. About 3 clicks away, you are downloading a considerably smaller tarball, and you are basically ready to start the installation process for Drupal. This is where it gets a little different. You basically need to have some stuff already on your computer, like whether you're using MAMP, WAMP, or like an Acquia desktop, or you've installed Apache on your own with your own mod PHP. You have to have a MySQL server already running and set up. You have to create the database yourself before you actually get going with Drupal. So there's a little more things to do. It's documented very well. They do have great documentation on getting started, but you are going to have to know some things ahead of time before you can actually get started with Drupal. So theirs is extracting your web root, set up your database, head to the browser, and then you actually run their install wizard through the web. You may, yeah, actually, please ask questions as we go, because there's lots of stuff, and it'll be difficult for you to remember which section you want to ask a question about. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, but I think it'd be nice if we could get the Heroku button put up there. Like, it does work really well. I was quite surprised. It installs. Yeah, because we don't have. Yeah. Right. Right. Oh, I agree, and that's actually one of my kind of findings that Drupal is very, very approachable because they have put things like this in there. Try a hosted demo. I mean, it's like one-click installers, and you're good to go. So yeah, you don't have to download and install, but I was trying to do it from more of a developer standpoint. If I wanted to actually work on Drupal and be productive, I got some stuff I got to do on my laptop before I can do that. Now, what's interesting with Drupal as opposed to Plone, so you just saw kind of the core, what is called the core Drupal download button. But Drupal also has these things called distributions. And I don't know if anybody here familiar with Drupal and kind of familiar with the concept of distributions. So what they've got are these kind of pre-built sets of add-ons maintained by somebody so that you could do, for example, a open social portal. This is a distribution of Drupal with basically core plus X number of add-ons. They also put in, which is really nice, some sample content to kind of give you a feel for how the site should work. And we don't have that. We really kind of miss out on. I mean, we put in news, events, and members in the kind of main nav to start with Plone, but it doesn't give you a feel for like example kind of content, how a user profile should really look. And this gets you a full kind of in-context experience. And there's a bunch of these. Now, not all of them are compatible with Drupal 8. So I will be talking about Drupal 8 specifically, unless I say otherwise. Drupal 8 has, let's see if I got it in here. This is another one. This is like a sports league. So if you're running a team for your kids or whatever, they've got sites where you can put up sports league stuff. Some of the more popular Drupal distributions are not compatible yet with Drupal 8. For example, they have one called Open Atrium, which is like an intranet in a box type solution. They have one called Commerce Kickstart, which is also very popular for doing e-commerce online with Drupal. But those aren't compatible with Drupal 8 yet. And we'll talk about compatibility in a bit. But yeah, this is kind of that installation process. So once you've downloaded and installed, you still have to go through kind of a next finish installer where it asks you some questions about your database name and password and things like that to get going. But once you are installed, the upgrade process is kind of nice. It does tell you if you're out of date. These are some things if I put these on my wish list of what Plone could do, I really wish Plone had this built into the control panel where it would check for updates and tell you when you're out of date or when you need a hotfix or a patch. So because of security track records, I think they've built this in to keep people really aware of whether they're out of date or getting out of date with their current Drupal versions. Now, Plone don't really have distributions like that, but we do have a couple groups have gone off and built some interesting things on top of Plone. I don't know how to kind of classify these, but I know the wildcard group is doing Castle CMS, which looks really interesting to me. They're kind of bundling opinionated technologies together to give you a really nice experience. I don't think sign-in has migrated to like Plone 5, and I don't know how relevant they still are, but that was a internet, like social internet portal. And then the Quave project is based off of Plone 5 and also has an open source version of it that you can download and try out and install. So I know if you're in this room, you won't be seeing the Quave demo, but I highly recommend you guys checking that out because they've done a really good job of addressing usability issues and making that guided experience of an intranet and knowledge management tool like super easy. So we're going to talk a little bit about the out-of-the-box experience. It's just kind of general features you get without having to add any add-ons into the system, and also what kind of content types and things are available as you start. So your very first experience with Drupal, firing it up, you logged in. They have the edit bar across the top, kind of like our Plone toolbar. This admin buttons here, it can actually be pushed over to the side, kind of like ours, where you can have it on the top or the left side. Drupal 8 focused on a lot of usability fixes. So they recognize, I think they've got a lot of people in their community, kind of tremendously more than maybe Plone community does. But they focus on a lot of usability, UI, UX. Drupal 8 finally comes out of the box with a WYSIWYG editor installed. It used to be that if you wanted to use a what you see is what you get editor through the web, you had to install an add-on module, which we'll talk about add-on modules later, but it can be a double-edged sword because if you get stuck at a certain version of an add-on module and you can't upgrade, you really kind of get hosed. So it's nice to have that built into their core features now. Another big usability, the icons apparently were a big deal for the Drupal community to put there in their toolbar. They said they got a big win in testing. And they have a package installer. So directly inside of Drupal, you can actually go to install add-ons or modules from Drupal.org into your system without having to go to the file system. There's actually, I think I've got a screenshot of it in there later, but you basically just paste in the URL of the thing you want or upload a zip file that includes the module you want to install. It installs it, activates it, and you're good to go. So they really kind of simplified that process for people who are new and getting used to installing add-ons into their product. Let's see. Yes?
How much of the usability not just because they have
I think there's a lot of this community. I mean, we talked a little bit about Acquia and their role in the community. Obviously, they're a big force in their community because they kind of have a central group that has a lot of money and investment. But their focus is strictly on, most of the time, strictly on hosting. So Acquia is a group that the founder of Drupal works for, and they try to basically focus on providing a enterprise-grade, super bulletproof hosting platform to put your Drupal site into. They try not to compete with the Drupal integrators and developers who are doing day-to-day work on Drupal sites. But the community is broken up into teams, kind of like we are. They have a security team and a core team and this and that. So I think it's mostly community-driven. At least that's the impression I got, through this process. It was very community-driven. So what I thought was interesting is in a basic Drupal install, you have two content types available to you out of the box, which they seem fairly similar to me as well. You have an article and a basic page. Now, Drupal does include a book content type, but it's not active, and a forum content type that is not active. They used to ship with a blog and a poll, but in Drupal 8, they removed those out of the core product. They really do guide people toward custom content type creation through the web. versus add-on modules or standard content types that are already built in and ready to go for you. So again, that is interesting that basically you've got two content types as an out-of-the-box experience. I thought that was kind of a limiting. Now, what they also have introduced in core of Drupal 8 is a thing that used to be a contrib package, like an add-on for Drupal called views. And you could think of views as basically the equivalent of our collections or smart folders. And they do a lot with that, kind of like we would do if everyone had, if Mosaic was, prime time and everyone was using Mosaic now, we're using tiles and blocks and things. They use views to make basically collections of content show up anywhere inside the site and make layouts for different kinds of pages. So that's their technology for that. It's called views. Now they also have users, files, and comments. So kind of standard stuff like we have as far as like user management. They're as entities inside the site that you can refer to, but they're not full-fledged content types. Now Plone, when you install it out of the box, we also have done a great focus on usability and redesigning from Plone 4 to Plone 5. I won't have to go too deep into this because I hope you people know what this thing looks like. We've been talking about it a lot. But what I really wanted to show off was I still like the fact that we have a great set of built-in content types that you can use right out of the box. I think this helps guide new users toward managing content right away. The old argument of the product versus the framework. Plone is nice out of the box because you can use it right away. Someone can install it and start managing content. They don't have to do a lot of configuration. They don't have to set up their own content types. Drupal appears to be more of a, you install it, and then you better start doing some configuration to it first before you really want to start using it. You want to set up your information architecture. You want to set up your content types and things like that. So yeah, we have a great set of out-of-the-box content types. We also have users and groups management, discussion items. So those do exist as well. Now when you get into products and modules, Plone 5, I don't think we went forward in this direction with products and modules. Right now, I even kind of dressed this up by pointing to the new beta of PyPy, but basically we're sending new people directly to PyPy without much guidance about how to find add-ons. It's very hard to find a Plone 5 theme in PyPy. You basically have to know how to run the checkboxes, and even then, the results are iffy because you're relying on people having filled out the classifiers correctly in their setup.pys. I don't think this is a good situation for new people coming to the community because it's hard to navigate. I mean, we kind of got some suggested add-ons on the main page for our site, for plone.org, but I think we can do a better job here. Now, of the add-ons that are in PyPy, yes? Oh, good. I'm going to be excited when this is what PyPy looks like when you go to it. The current one, I think 1998 called wants their site back. They do a great job. I mean, they're working really hard and keeping that thing very, very stable for us. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this new. This is pyramid-based, the new PyPy, which is pretty awesome. But the Plone add-ons inside PyPy, there's about 2,800 of them listed. But once you filter down just for Plone 5, you can see right there we've got 232. Probably half of those are Plone itself. So there's not a lot of add-on packages that are compatible with Plone 5 yet, which is a little bit disappointing. So not a lot are ready to go yet. Now Drupal, on the other hand, and we're talking about Drupal 8. So Drupal has over 35,000 modules available in their download and extend kind of their add-ons section. Now the issue is, no, I was going to say this is definitely again a double-edged sword. I think because Drupal has shipped with less core functionality out of the box, they expected most people to build modules to extend it to get to the level of Plone. I mean, probably Drupal 7 compared to Plone 4, you had to add in about 35 or more modules into Drupal just to get to kind of feature parity with what Plone gives you out of the box. And once you've added those 35 modules in, who's to say they're going to stay maintained, upgraded? There's a lot of lock-in that can happen. Now, when you do filter down by only Drupal 8, you're down to about 1,700 packages. So they have the same. You're going to see a lot of parallels between our communities. We started nearly the same time. We released Plone 5 and Drupal 8 about nearly exactly the same time. And the adoption rates have been about the same kind of path. I'll show that later, and I've got a graph showing kind of adoption of Drupal 8, and it's been slow. And the developers have been slow to update their add-ons for Drupal 8 as well, which is, like I said, a problem, I think. But yeah, so there's not really 35,000 modules available. There's far, far, far fewer than that. But here's that one cool feature I think we should add into Plone, which is this. If you want to install a new module, you just come in here and paste in the URL to the Drupal.org site. It goes and grabs it. I would hope they're doing some kind of code signing, signature checking, hash stuff. Oh boy. Well, we should do it like that. Because it is a cool feature for newbies. If someone's coming to the site and they want to be like, oh, I really want to try Plone Form Gen, how do I get it? Oh, well, you're supposed to add it into your build.out or your setup.py, and you go rerun this thing, and then that's how you get this add-on. This is way, way nicer from a new person's perspective, not understanding the whole ecosystem of how you add modules and add-ons into your site. Which Plone Form Gen is a great add-on. We always recommend it highly. And they've addressed this a bit with the Drupal 8 stuff. I'll talk about that later when we get to the security slides. But the content editing story between the two sites, Drupal 8 uses CK Editor, which is available as an add-on for Plone, but that's now the default out-of-the-box editing experience. And obviously, Plone is using TinyMC4, which is quite nice. Now, the big difference is how they lay out their content. So we'll talk a bit about, okay, so yeah, here's Plone 4 with our nice, TinyMC4. I'm pretty excited we got that finally upgraded. And now I'll talk a little bit about editing content. One of the nice things about editing content is this is probably our super secret sauce right here. Is the fact our workflows are so extendable, so tied into security. There's just a lot of benefit to being able to track the state of items and have multiple states and have multiple kinds of transitions and all the things we can do with our workflow system. Just kicks the snot out of what you can do in Drupal. So in Drupal, here's the CK editor. You see we've got kind of a very stripped down toolbar there. You can actually change what kind of toolbar you get right from the edit box. If you're more of a power user of CK editor, you can get more buttons available to you, or you can go to plain text. And all the button sets are editable through their control panel, kind of like ours are for TinyMCE. So again, very, very similar. Now, if you want to brace yourselves for their whopping workflow setup here. This is pretty much the workflow. Save and publish or save as unpublished. Like it's on or off. There's not really a concept of moving things through states in Drupal. So there's kind of the biggest area of departure and differences here is that their workflow system it's on or off. So it's great for simple, you need simplest use cases where people aren't trying to do like vacation leave forms through their intranet where they want to be able to have approval processes going on there. They're not really trying to model business processes here. They're just basically saying either the page is visible or the page is not visible. And we'll talk again a little more about that in in the security section. But they do have some workflow add-ons. They've not been maintained, unfortunately. The last update Workflow NG had was in 2014. There's a rules add-on that apparently replaces it, but I don't think it's still in beta for Drupal 8 at this moment. So there's not really that many great options even to go to a more robust state machine type workflow for us. So when you want to customize your product and you want to go hire some people to actually do some development for you, what is that going to cost typically in each community? So we kind of looked at this. The typical going rates for independent contractors in the Plone community is anywhere between $50 and $100 an hour. The typical consulting companies charge between like $100, $185 an hour. That's kind of the going rates for consulting work. In Drupal, there doesn't seem to be much of a distinction between freelancers and shops. There's a couple big shops, but really it's about the same pricing. It's about $50 to $200 an hour for Drupal resources. Because some of these pretty high profile sites have got some dollars, so that's why they kind of got that top end. But there's a huge amount of the low end, like $50 an hour, Drupal developers that are out there. Now, when it comes to customizing Plone, you've basically got build out. You want to add on packages for your site if you want to make a custom theme or content type. We typically make a custom policy package that is a place where you may put your workflow policies. You may save out generic setup exports of your settings. Things like that is what you'd put into these kinds of packages. What's nice with the custom development now in Plone 5, and this was in Plone 4 too, is the dexterity custom content types, being able to do this stuff through the web. This gets us much more in line with the Drupal 8 or the Drupal 7 experience of creating their content types through the web as well. So those people are going to be a lot more comfortable now coming over to Plone and being able to do basically click, 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 build some content types, and be able to be productive inside of Plone. And what's also nice, we can they have the same feature where they can basically create their content types through the web and then export them out as a YAML to the file system. I love the fact that we can take these and export these out as XML and actually use them inside of our content types package and then redistribute that as an add-on if you made something that was generically interesting to other groups. Now, customizing Drupal 8 has actually gotten a little more sophisticated or complicated, depending on who you ask in the Drupal community. There's actually been a fork of Drupal at Drupal 7 called Backdrop, because this Drupal 8 is a major departure from what was the typical way of developing core Drupal and making new Drupal add-ons. They moved to the new Symfony, basically web application framework. They ripped out the whole bottom end and replaced it with a new, basically a component architecture system. As I was talking to my friend Doug about Symfony and customizing Drupal, he is not a fan. He's like, you have to have a computer science degree anymore to be able to customize things. You have to like dig down into like 5 different directories and edit 10 different files to be able to add something to Drupal. I go, you sound like you're talking about Plone. You would be very comfortable as a Plone developer looking at the Symfony framework. Basically, what they've done is mimicked a lot of things we gained in Plone 2.5. So that when we incorporated Zope 3 into Plone, we started getting the component architecture stuff, adapters and views and all those kinds of nice things that we got in Plone 2.5. They just got in Drupal 8. They can export their settings now out to the file system, like kind of generic setup. So again, I think we would be fairly comfortable with this new set of tools, but I think it's been hampering some of the developer adoption of Drupal 8 because they did such a radical change on the back-end framework. Now, when you're customizing Drupal, they do have a lot of different ways to do it. This is one area where they've got a lot of flexibility. There are some cool command line tools such as the Drush shell. So they've got this thing called Drush makefiles. So that's like the Drupal shell tool. So you can actually do the templating and boilerplate code, kind of like we do with Mr. Bob or what we used to do with Template or Zopescale. Same thing for Drupal console. They finally, in PHP, have a way of basically pip installing and pinning versions, and that's called Conductor. So if you start doing any Drupal, you want to make sure you get familiar with Conductor because that allows you to pin versions so you don't get, let's just say, a bad experience when you go to like run the upgrade and all of a sudden you've got new versions of packages. But they do rely still on a heavy through the web experience. The typical integrator or Drupal developer is going to start through the web. They're going to create their information architecture and their content types first there, and then export them out to the file system so they can move them into their other various environments. So here's this is their custom content type. Basically, the equivalent of our dexterity is that you can create. I've created what is this? A recipe. So this is a recipe content type. You just basically click add fields, add fields, add fields. They've got different kinds of fields. For example, text, long format of a summary, or standard text. But it's basically a whole set of like different fields like we have for dexterity for building their content types. And then it gets exported out as YAML to the file system. Oh, so another nice thing we kind of talked about when we get into a little bit of hosting. Getting started with Drupal actually is made pretty easy if you're using one of the new hosting providers that is available in the Drupal community. One of the example ones I'll talk about is called Pantheon. And you basically go sign up for an account, tell them you want a new Drupal 8 instance. It spins up a dev, testing, and production instance for you simultaneously and gives you a Git repository that you just clone back to your machine. And as you make changes and push, you pick which environment you're going to migrate that or push that code to. So it really makes it like they've got kind of best practices baked in with a system like that. So if I was going to start with something with Drupal on a project, I would use one of these services because it really helps guide you through the development process of customizing Drupal and making sure you're doing it in a well-tracked way. We'll talk about theming now, unless you guys have more questions about customizations. So in Plone, this is an area where I'm really happy, is that I think Diazo has really improved our customization story and theming story tremendously for people who are new to Plone. No longer do you have to learn, well, I think I had to write down the list because it was so big, ZPT, ZCML, Python code, Python scripts, component architecture, adapters, browser views. Like there's this almost endless list of Z words you have to learn to be able to do theming in Plone previously to Plone 5, well, and Plone app theming in Plone 4. So I think we've made a great stride here that if you can sit a designer or a web engineer down and have them know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then where is Annette? If you can be an XSLT ninja like Annette, oh my gosh, so you can do amazing things literally without having to leave your browser window. So I was really impressed with the presentation this morning about what you guys have been doing with Diazo rules. So and it doesn't seem like it's that unapproachable. That's probably the biggest technology you gotta learn is the Diazo rules. Not too big a deal. So screenshot of like our Plone app templating. It gives you the ability to do through the web, create your rules, create your templates, do all this customization. Oh yeah, and the fact that we now with the mockup inside Plone 5, it's really easy to bring in fancy pants JavaScript libraries and do cool stuff with React or Moment or whatever the things you want to like try out. It's way easier to do that now than it was before. Drupal theming, it's not like what we have now in Plone 5. It's more like what we had in Plone 4 and Plone 3. You basically have this concept of main base themes, and you typically, when you're making a theme, you make a sub-theme and just override the pieces from the base theme that you want to change. What's interesting, the templating language they use now in Drupal 8 has changed. It used to be PHP templates, so you actually wrote like real PHP code in your templates, which was a source of a lot of the security vulnerabilities that came out with Drupal prior to 8. Twig is a templating language that we will all be very familiar with because it was written by our very own Armin Ronecker. So it looks just like Jinja 2 or Django templates, and it's very nice. And this has actually led to a tremendous improvement in the security of Drupal 8. So again, as Plone developers, we would be probably pretty at home, or Python developers in general, we'd be pretty at home with the Twig templating system. But it's very similar to how scanning used to work in Plone, where you would override like base view or whatever document view, whatever kind of thing you wanted to customize. You do the same kind of thing with Drupal 8. You basically override in a sub theme the bits and pieces you want to do to customize your look and feel. So it's still the same thing: HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And in this Twig, it comes as part of the Symfony 2 framework that they moved to with Drupal 8. Yeah. No, so that's another big difference. They don't have a through the web editing experience for Drupal. That's another big win, I think, on the Plone side is the through the web templating. Right now, if you want to customize and modify these themes or create your own sub-themes, you do have to do it from the file system. Yeah. Yeah. On top of this, yeah. Yeah, so exactly. For people making their own modules for Drupal, they will provide what are called hooks. So if you want to add something into a menu someplace, you make your own hook and write your own code in there, and it injects it into the whatever menu you put in there. But like you said, one developer's menu hook is going to look different than another developer's menu hook, and it may be difficult to. Yeah. Right. Yeah, they do that's where the views come in. So they have like layouts with these views. They put blocks wherever they want to put them, and those also are hooks, so that the module developers will make their own blocks, and they have different code styles for all those as well. When you install Drupal, and actually when you're using Drupal, this is another area where we differ quite a bit. Is there's typically going to be a default theme, and that's the kind of front end that most web visitors are going to see for your site. But they also install, and they kind of can't see it down here, but there's an administration theme. So you typically may have one single base theme and two sub themes. One strictly for like editing, like the content contributor or content editor experience, and one which is for the web visitors who are coming into the site. So you really don't get that full in-context editing like we do with Plone, that as I'm editing the page, I still see a lot of the page around as well. So that's interesting. They've got this administration theme, default theme going back and forth. So you'll flip back and forth between these versions of the site. This is the administration theme, and you can see the back to site button up there in the left-hand corner. That's that gets you back into the retail version of the site itself. So this is kind of just showing the theme registry. They use YAML to set up kind of a settings file. That's how they hook up things inside of your modules when you create an add-on for Drupal. And they typically, your standard theme package is going to have a templates directory. Actually, in Drupal 8, you have to put your templates in the templates directory, or it won't find them correctly. It used to be you could name it whatever you wanted. But they have the YAML files that describe the add-on or the module for your theme, and then all the config and CSS go all through in there. Now this is the views part of this. I believe. Let me do that. So you set up the your information architecture. Yeah. Like, oh, you mean through the content editing experience, right? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's something I didn't dive into too deep. Oh, right, because they give a little pencil, like when you kind of hover over sections of the site. We turned that off in Plone because it was a pain in the butt. But yeah, they do. So when it gets down to like blocks, you'll see here there's like kind of like we have viewlets. Everyone here familiar with like the viewlet system inside of Plone? There's all those little spots throughout the pages where you can inject like your own snippets of code or part of the view. They do theirs through the web with this section called blocks. And so this is where you can actually say, I want to put the site branding into various areas, the main navigation, and you configure what pieces go where. And it's basically the equivalent of us configuring our viewlets, throwing the nav into the header viewlet, et cetera. That's their equivalent for, and they do it all through the web, which we can kind of too with the managed viewlets, but we don't typically show that to normal human beings because it's a little tricky. Now, upgrading and migrations. This, again, is an area where we will differ, but Drupal 8 is working on this. One nice thing about Plone is you could take a Plone 1.0 site, and you could migrate it step by step by step all the way up to Plone 5 and actually have a usable site afterwards. Plone comes with a great set of documentation at every release for all the things you typically need to do between versions if you want to make sure your add-on code is ready for the next version of Plone. Now, if you want to migrate code in and out of Plone, we've got through the community, not built in, but through the community, there is like transmogrifier pipelines, for example, so you can actually export and then kind of dump and reload if you wanted to start fresh with your site. Depending on the age of the site and the number of custom add-ons you'd ever put into your site, I will recommend the dump and reload version of it versus the try and walk it all the way through from Plone 1 to Plone 5. But if you haven't had a lot of add-ons or it's a very clean site, it's very, very feasible to go right from whatever version of Plone straight up through to Plone 5. Now, again, add-on products will be the real sticking point for you. If you're on add-on products that haven't updated their code for Plone 5, you're stuck until they do, or you remove it and put some kind of alternate technology in there. A big advantage of Plone over Drupal, given our kind of large, robust feature set, I typically think we don't have as many add-ons or modules installed into our sites, which makes them a little more able to migrate easier. The Drupal sites, so up until Drupal 8, each previous version of Drupal was basically a fork of the previous Drupal and started from scratch, like scorched earth almost. So migrating from one version of Drupal to the next version of Drupal was typically not a priority for them. They kind of expected you to dump your content out, upgrade the newest version of Drupal, and redo everything from scratch if you're going to actually migrate to a new version of Drupal. It's changing with Drupal 8. They are stabilizing their APIs. They're trying to make them more backward compatible. So if you're going from 8 to 8.1 to 8.2 or to 9, The idea being it would be possible to actually migrate your content in place, but that's not been historically the case for much of Drupal. But then you have the same problem with add-on products, but at a much greater scale, because you probably have a lot more modules installed into your Drupal site for that. Yeah, they also have the ability for you to do migrations in and out of Drupal. So people would typically do what's called a Drupal to Drupal migration when they're going from like version 5 to 6, 6 to 7, etc., which dumps it out to the file system, and then you reload it back in as part of the Drupal migration. So hosting for the two kinds of technologies. The Plone hosting can be done on lots of different kinds of cloud services. What I typically find with Plone hosting though is it's a lot of do-it-yourself. You need to set up the machines, install the dependencies. There aren't a lot of these there aren't hardly any push button ways of installing and hosting Plone out there, other than say like the Heroku button. But has anyone run the Heroku at scale with any kind of a large site with large traffic? Yeah, I haven't either. So I'd be interesting to know how well that works, because that's a really compelling story for getting people started with Plone for sure. But if you have even the most modest site, I would recommend people running Zio using 2 cores on a VM someplace, maybe about 1 gigabyte of RAM, because it all varies based on the number of add-ons you've got in your site, the amount of content you've got in your site. But just a general kind of rule of thumb, I don't typically go much smaller than that. I've got some pricing in here as well. So, for example, something at DigitalOcean will cost you about $20 a month. EC2, I'd recommend no smaller than like a T2 medium for reasonable sites, but that's about $37 a month. I was surprised Azure was so expensive. Is anyone hosting on Azure currently? That's probably why. It's a little pricey. And then obviously I have to pimp my own services a little bit here, but 6 Feet Up does offer kind of entry-level hosting of Plone sites at $50 a month as well. Yeah, actually, I didn't put Google Compute in here. You know why? Because no one's using it. Yeah. No, I actually had a coffee with a guy from Gartner, and we were talking about the various cloud platforms. And basically, the enterprise is scared to death of Google Compute because of the way Google can willy-nilly kill off any platform. So at any moment, you could be the victim of Google's choices. So, and then we also have, like I said, the Heroku button. I think is quite interesting. For free, I think you can get up to about 200 pages of content in your site before you need to start paying for the Postgres dyno, because I think you get like 10,000 rows for free in the Postgres database offered there. Similar situation. Yeah. Oh, wow. True. Yeah, if you've just got kind of a small brochureware site, that will work. Like I said, this has been a 3-month process. That price probably got put in there a month and a half ago. And for Drupal, it's pretty similar as far as like the size of kind of horsepower you need to host a reasonably sized Drupal site with comparable traffic and amount of content. The difference here though is you can have a DIY do-it-yourself Drupal deployment, but there's so many great services out there like this Pantheon, Platform SH, where they just set up multiple instances for you. They actually have the push button. I want to bring my production data back to my test instance. I want to migrate this code changes up to the new instance. A lot of them will even go so far as if your code is with them in their repository and there's a new version of Drupal out there, some of them are already set up to basically splat the update of Drupal automatically onto your thing, and you just need to go push a button to approve that you want that released. So they really eased the experience of deploying Drupal. You can host with Acquia.com, but if you have to ask, it's probably too expensive for you. So it is quite pricey from what I know. Now, another nice thing these other like Pantheon and Acquia and Platform SH give you is a lot of them will also include services like New Relic as part of that plan. For $25 a month, you'll get Drupal hosting with New Relic stats. If anyone's used New Relic, it's a pricey service on its own, and it gives you a wealth of information about what's going on behind the scenes inside your site. So that's also pretty cool. Performance, web performance, both systems have similar techniques for accelerating. I mean, if you guys are already familiar with using Varnish and HA proxy and memcached for auth and sessions. The two systems almost look identical when you go look at their performance pages about how to actually accelerate pages. Plone, though, out of the box has some advantages. With our Plone app caching control panel, we have the ability through the web to kind of adjust and do some settings where for how long you want to cache something. Basically, you can kind of customize the caching experience through the web. Plone also allows us to purge, send at least a very minimalistic purge request for at least the page and maybe the container it's in. The Drupal out of the box experience doesn't have that. What's also nice with Plone is you can, with a very small extension, customize that purging behavior. So if you want to make sure the front page gets purged, if that item happens to be showing on the front page as well, you can do that really easily with Plone. The Drupal 8, they don't have the purge capability out of the box. There's an add-on that you would have to put into your site to be able to get purging working correctly. Now, one thing that is really cool in Drupal 8 that we don't have is the new Big Pipe, Facebook Big Pipe. Have you guys heard of Big Pipe yet? That is a really cool technology. So if you guys have gone to, who here is on Facebook? Yeah, okay, everyone should raise their hand. If you go to Facebook and you've ever noticed that when you first launch the page, you see like gray placeholders that look like the posts on your wall, and then all of a sudden they kind of filter in with like the real ones, that's Big Pipe. Basically, they consolidate the non-personalized version of your page into a very few number of requests, get that to you quickly, and then they stream in the dynamic bits behind the scenes. Drupal 8.1 ships with this out of the box, which, again, that's a pretty fantastic performance feature, and it's something maybe we should even look into in the Plone community, because it helps with, like, what was the talk yesterday about the Google AMP, yeah, exactly, same kind of thing to help accelerate, and I think that's going to be really important for mobile devices on varying degrees of nice connectivity. So that's one area where I think Drupal has added some really nice customizations for the performance. I'm sure this is the slide everyone's been waiting to hear about, right? It's security. Each community, Plone and Drupal, has a dedicated security team. How many people are in our security team? I couldn't find a number. Steve, you know? Or Nathan? Where's Nathan on here? I'm guessing it's like 5, 6 people are kind of our security team. They're very busy. They do great work, but it's that secret, right? Drupal's security team is 40 dedicated people. Some of them paid by their employers, at least maybe a half time or some percentage of their work time is actually dedicated to Drupal security. They obviously have a lot to do, as we've seen in the past. But what's nice, Plone has only had reports of a very few sites being hacked, and those sites basically weren't patched within 6 months of the release date of the patch. So it's very rare that Plone sites are actually going to be exploited, especially as the people are being vigilant about applying their patches. So we have, the no 0 day claim we make, I think is pretty important for people who care about security. See, I went to that exact page and I only saw like 2 people because maybe I wasn't logged in. Okay, so yeah, it's all secret. You guys are very secretive with your security team membership. Oh, I got these slides slightly out of order. So that's kind of when it comes to like security teams. One of the nice things about Zope and Plone is that we were built on Zope. And I think that's a big benefit for us when it comes to security. We've basically been able to leverage that built-in roles and permissions system, and we've augmented it with our own users and groups, where we have a really fine-grained experience for being able to customize who can see what, when, and where. And when you combine that with our awesome workflow tools, you really get this tight experience when it comes to ensuring people can't see things when they're not supposed to see them, or making sure pages get published, or kind of the whole experience is really, really nice. And I like that out of the box, we have the built-in roles of like contributor, editor, reader, reviewer, site manager, and manager. When we look at what Drupal does, which we will in a second, you'll see it's a very different experience. We also have very easy checkboxes here, and what these, for most people who don't know, these security settings checkboxes that are in through the Plone experience actually manipulate that. Well, they actually manipulate this, which is something I tell people never to touch. because this is not meant for any human to ever touch. If you were to, this page is long. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is the security tab at the root of your Plone site. And again, if anyone ever learns anything from me, it should be to never touch this screen under any circumstances. Let Plone do it through the Plone, because that's what it's doing for you here. But this is also part of our power. The fact that we get down to such a granular level with what people can see and do. And you can think of all these permissions in Plone as like little locks or little gates that kind of unlock or show functionality through the site. Plone or Drupal doesn't have nearly this robust of a system. This is the equivalent of their security tab. This is out of the box. You can see that there's 3 roles, 2 of which are basically virtual roles like we have, authenticated and anonymous. If you want to do more than this, it's up to you to kind of design your security scheme by adding in your own roles, and then again checking the boxes. It's a long page, not as long as ours, but it's a long page of managing checkboxes. That's how they do their roles and security inside of the Drupal system. So again, I think it's an area where we really excelled because we're built on top of a system that thought about this first. I think Zope was made with security in mind. Yeah, so now they do in Drupal 8. So all the Drupal 8 settings can all be exportable into YAML, just like we have a generic setup exporter. They have a similar thing here as well, so that they can move those from like environment to environment, for example. Yeah. At the what level? Yeah. Right. Now the individual piece of content is either published or not published. Not that I could see out of the box. We didn't dive too terribly deep into it, but we have got an amazing system when it comes to like local roles. And if you haven't checked out dynamic local roles with borg local role, that is amazing. I mean, the fact that we can customize based on any fact or data inside the system, or even external to the system. Yeah. Right. 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 Theirs is going to be based on like the type of content. Like certain users may have, like you said, access to create this kind of content versus that kind of content, but not where they put the content inside the site. That's handled by their view system. Right. This is about the only other security settings I could dig up in the Drupal site was kind of the registration and cancellation. So that was kind of the equivalent of our security tab inside of Plone. Now, when it comes to security track records, I really only wanted to compare Plone 5 and Drupal 8. They're not too far off from each other. I mean, you kind of, when comparing exploits, numbers really don't matter too much in security because it's about track record, it's about severity. There's so many different factors to take into consideration. So I wouldn't look at these numbers and be like, oh, well, Drupal 8 is way less secure than Plone. They've got a very vigilant security team. They've changed up their framework quite a bit to address a lot of these kind of security issues, and they're right on par with, I think, the improvements that are showing here in the numbers. The reason these numbers are so low is because there's such low adoption of Drupal 8. This graph here is showing Drupal core usage, and so you can see here's 2016, here's January 2016. This line here at the very bottom is Drupal 8. Yeah, that's Drupal 8. The big ones up here are Drupal 7 and 6. Or, yeah, 7 and 6. Oh, that's total, yeah. But this is Drupal 7 right here. So Drupal 7 is still hugely popular out there. Now, when I say hugely popular, it's really not that popular. If you look down here, this is WordPress usage. WordPress accounts for about 26.4% of all CMS sites out there. Drupal is about 2.2. So in terms of scale, Drupal is dwarfed by WordPress, kind of much the same way we're dwarfed by Drupal. So you can see we're kind of in the long tail of CMS usage out there. So the reason we've not seen a lot of security issues with Drupal 8 is definitely because of, I think, the adoption rates for Drupal 8. The numbers here, the total number there is 1.2 million sites reporting back for Drupal. As of last week, there were 125,000 Drupal 8 sites out there. There's only 41,000 January 1st. So they're getting adoption, but it's still not taking off like crazy. I wish we had this for Plone. Like, we don't have any way of we don't report back to home about like our versions. Like, I think we should, because I think it'd be interesting to have those kind of same numbers for us. All right, so intellectual property and community. I love this because we are an awesome community. We've been around since 2001, but Plone 5 got released in September. We created our foundation in 2004, so I think we were ahead of the game when it came to protecting our product and our IP and in our community. And this just, 895 contributors have put code into Plone at some point in time along the way, which I think is also awesome. But then I heard about the Drupal numbers. They've had over 3,000 committers into Drupal. This says 150. I got this off of Olo. It's not accurate. They actually have a Drupal commit tracking site out there that shows you for this version of Drupal how many people committed, what their names were, and what they committed. It's quite interesting. Very similar history. First Drupal released in 2001. Drupal 8 was released in 2015. They started the Drupal Association in 2009. Now, the Drupal Association isn't like our Plone Foundation necessarily. They are mostly there to raise money and run the events, like the Drupal cons and things like that. So they do a lot of promotion, but they are not the IP holder or trademark holder for Drupal. That is still solely controlled by Dries, and this is the copyright statement right from the code. I don't know how this scales when you've got 3,000 contributors if they all own their original work that's inside the code. So it seems to be run by best good neighbor policy so far. They've not run into any kind of problems. That scares this part scares me right here, because if they want to change their license, what do they do? How do they go about this? This is just it would be an insurmountable task if they ever wanted to do something like changing their license, for example. But then Drupal 8 has also spawned a whole new fork of Drupal off of Drupal 7 called Backdrop. So there's a new CMS out there for the people who are staunch. I like doing my Drupal 7 way of doing things. Actually, Doug, the guy who helped me with this presentation, is a big fan of Backdrop as well. He kind of falls in line. You saw the graph. There's a ton of Drupal 7 sites out there still, and people want that to kind of continue. So they're maintaining, enhancing. They're backporting some of the features of Drupal 8 when they can into Backdrop. But just be aware that if you are doing Drupal, there is a fork out there that is gaining some traction and some popularity. Oh, so as far as community, I forgot to mention, so for Plone Conference, here we are. This is us. But we also have lots of sprints, symposiums, lots of events where we get together. And by comparison, DrupalCon this year in New Orleans had over 3,000 people. Their regional events are getting about 1,000 people per regional event right now. But they started their first con in 2005 with 50 to 100 people. So kind of similar startings to us, similar size. They have the Drupal cons, the Drupal camps, lots of meetups around the globe. So there's a big, huge community of people doing Drupal out there. Really nice, powerful thing. So in summary, I think we're seeing a lot of convergence of features between Drupal and Plone. A lot of the through-the-web content type creation that Drupal has had for quite some time, we're finally getting comfortable with, and it's nice. Drupal 8's moved into a component-style architecture, so we would be very comfortable if we had to do work on a Drupal site. We would know how to go look up all the crazy abstractions, thanks to Martin Isfelli. Plone has always had collections. Drupal's now added in views to their core, so if you're familiar with how collections work, and views would be really familiar to you if you went over to the Drupal side of things. And again, I think Plone, if we can get Mosaic, I think we talked about that for the roadmap, having Mosaic put into the core Plone, I think would be a big boost for us in terms of feature parity with the Drupal folks, because that would give us that ability to customize layouts and blocks on the pages. I will just say it, we absolutely kill it when it comes to workflows. That's one of our biggest strengths, and also the through-the-web theming with Plone app theming, I think also gives us a leg up over the Drupal community. The security standpoint for Drupal 8 is definitely looking much more optimistic than it used to. We'll see as they get more adoption and more people actually using it and road testing against higher profile sites. Unfortunately, Plone hosting is still DIY. The Drupal hosting options look really attractive. They've always kind of had push button installers into various dashboards, but I think that the fact that they've got these enterprise grade deployment options is a weak point for Plone because we don't have something that is comparable. But in the end of the day, if you had to choose between the two, it really comes down to your needs. If you were doing a large intranet collaboration site, various kinds of security and workflow, you need to have something like Plone. Okay, for Drupal, so Workbench. But again, I was trying to compare the core features. So there's a lot of things you can add into Drupal. Yeah, it's not core. They definitely don't have that. But if you are actually don't have a very technical staff and you need to onboard people very quickly to get spun up on a CMS, Drupal is actually very easy to get going with. I think they've made a great amount of effort in their documentation, the install process, the getting going process, the whole through the web process, and then these hosting providers giving you that ease of use between the environments. It's very easy to get a fairly non-technical staff spun up and starting to use Drupal. I don't know what their experience will be later when they're trying to do more complex things, but I think the ease of use initially has definitely been a benefit for Drupal. So I want to thank you guys all for hanging with me. I know I went a little over, sorry. But don't forget to do your survey so I can get feedback so we can improve this presentation and take it other places. Oh, shoot. It should be not that. But if you've used it earlier today, you should have it in your cache. So thank you all for coming.